Now, this Saturday, the Citizens' Assembly on the Eighth Amendment to the Constitution meets for the fourth time. The Assembly was convened, made up of a representative sample of views, to try to reach some consensus which it could recommend to government. This was an attempt by the Taoiseach to avoid the historically strident and nasty debates of the past.
Come up to the table, sign the petition, show your support to repeal the Eighth Amendment.
I'd say if it was put to the public, the people of Ireland, you're probably looking at about 80% would be in favour of it. It just goes to show how out of touch the politicians in this country are with the people.
What the government has committed to doing, and it's now up and running, it's establishing a Citizens' Assembly.
We can have this conversation in a mature way, unlike the way it's happened in the past.
Grace is proof that the diagnosis we were given, we were told 100% that she would not survive, and she did.
Now, later we'll be hearing from doctors for and against the repeal, and we'll also hear arguments from both sides of the debate with our panel guests, Maria Steen of the Iona Institute and Independent Socialist TD Claire Daly. But first I want to go to someone in our audience, Jennifer Ryan. I mean, this is not just a philosophical argument as far as you're concerned, because you've had a life experience which would be informed by this debate.
Yes, in 2012, when I was 22 weeks pregnant, we went along for our scan. And we were told then that our daughter had a fatal fetal condition. She had a fatal form of spina bifida. Her spine actually split from her shoulder blades down, and she had no kidneys, and then she had problems with her brain associated with the spina bifida as well. When there's no kidneys, there's no fluid around her, so my body was crushing her essentially as well, they told me. And when there's no fluid, the lungs can't develop, so she'd never have a chance to take a breath or be able to breathe, and there was nothing.
Was there any possibility that she would be born naturally at all?
Alive, no. They said it would be a very slim chance that, given their lack of fluid, that I would potentially damage her and that she would die while.
So your decision, how quickly did you come to a course of action?
When we found out, we had a few tests done and we had to wait for the results. So we had about 5 days, and we just went off and thought, with the medical information we've been given, what was the best choice for us. And being told that your body isn't actually even protecting your child is very difficult. And we didn't want her to feel any pain. Yeah. And for us, we felt continue with the pregnancy, she would eventually feel some pain, through.
So you decided to have an abortion?
Yes.
Where did you go?
We went to Liverpool Women's Hospital.
And did you travel by plane or by boat, by car? Did you bring your own car? Or what did you do?
Yeah, we got the boat over from Holyhead, and my husband drove up from there because we decided we wanted to bring our daughter home so that we could bury her here in Ireland.
How did you feel on that trip? On the way there, and then the procedure, and then on the way back with the tiny body of your baby?
It's so isolating, it's so lonely. You're on autopilot, you don't know what. You just need your supports around you, and you don't have that, and you're leaving your hospital and your family and your country and going somewhere you don't know the medical team you're going to, and you have no friendly face to go to, and it was just the two of us, and it was very upsetting. That Liverpool, the staff there are fantastic, and they just were so wonderful and so comforting and understanding, but it just wasn't home.
What did the medical people in Ireland say to you? We know they can't conduct a termination, they can't even recommend to go to a particular hospital. You've got to kind of ferret out that information yourself under the law. But were they supportive of your decision?
Yes. Yes, they said when we got the diagnosis, they said you have two options. You can continue and we'll scan you weekly for a heartbeat, and if her heart stops, then we'll induce you then, or else you can travel. So that's when we were sent off to have a think about it, and when we told them the decision, they were able to give us our scans and stuff to send over.
What was your reflection on the Irish Health Service, the HSE, knowing that you were doing something that you felt was the absolute right thing to do for yourself, but that the HSE could not help you, your own doctors could not help you?
You knew they couldn't do anything. They were totally tied, but they were so sympathetic to what they were having to tell you as well, you know, that these are your options, and, you know, neither option is going to bring your baby home alive with you. And it's just supporting you through that, I suppose.
Was it expensive, the whole trip? I mean, you had to get the boat, you had to drive there and pay for the procedure and get back.
It cost us around €3,000.
Did you have that money?
We had just been recently engaged, so we had been saving for our wedding, so that's how we had it. But, you know, we were fortunate that we had been saving for that. Yeah. Otherwise...
Before this happened to you, were you madly pro-choice, or were you pro-life, or did you have any thought-out view at all on this subject?
I suppose it didn't really come into my line of thought previously to this. I had never been personally affected, and that's why I got on board with TFMR Ireland, because it is something that has affected me personally, and that's why I speak for women and families who've suffered a fatal fetal abnormality.
So you want other people to have the choice in Ireland that you only had.
Yes.
Outside the jurisdiction?
Yes.
All right, Jennifer, thank you very much. TFMR's termination for medical reasons. And we want to thank Jennifer for her contribution, a very difficult personal experience that you've been through. So thank you for sharing it with us. We have a number of people on both sides of this argument. Ida Nic Fahuna, you're in favour of keeping the status quo, is that right?
Yes, in retaining the Eighth Amendment. I think what's being lost in this debate is the benefits, the goodness that the Eighth Amendment has done to this country. It's upheld a culture of life. Because of it, if we compare statistics to similar countries, up to 30 lives a day are being saved because we still have not accepted that abortion culture, where abortion almost becomes an expectation and a pressure to have it.
Okay. Explain once it becomes entrenched in society. Saving 30 lives. You mean that people are going to have their babies at full term rather than have an abortion where it's readily available here? Where it's
readily... If we compare countries that are similar to ours, Pat, and we compare our abortion rates of our pregnancies, the rate of those which are aborted, we have a far lower, for example, compared to Britain, which we are very culturally similar to.
Now you're kind of absolutist about this. You think we shouldn't touch the Eighth Amendment because it vindicates the right to life of the child equal to that of the mother and tries by the laws as best we can to defend and vindicate the right. So when you heard Jennifer's story and she made a decision which not many people would argue with, her personal decision, she was free to make it, but only by going to the UK. What do you say to someone in Jennifer's position tonight? Yeah,
and I won't pretend that I know any amount of the heartbreak or grief that Jennifer went to. But I would like to live in a society where we don't see something as something which may be a huge illness. We don't see it as something which we must eliminate with death. It's something that we should try and progress on, try and find cures for, try and actually improve to make our future, to make our entire lives better.
Even in the impossibility of Jennifer's situation, that there was never going to be a life.
I think what we have to acknowledge here, Pat, is that there is absolutely no condition in the world where a doctor can say for 100% that this child will not survive this pregnancy, that they will be born dead, and that therefore you may as well just have an abortion now. Because I think that it's a huge misinformation going around about children in these conditions, that they've been written off as dead already and that their lives are not living. But really, should somebody's right to life and their humanity be something as subjective as that can be changed and taken away based on somebody's subjective opinion?
Right, let's hear another view. Rita Harold, where's Rita? There you are, Rita. You're with the Repeal bus. Now, what is that doing?
So the Bus for Repeal is going to tour Ireland from Monday the 6th, in the lead up to International Women's Day, where women are going to be joining the Strike for Repeal, the Coalition to Repeal the 8th March at 5:30 at the Gardner Remembrance. And what we're doing on the bus is obviously campaigning for an immediate referendum to repeal the 8th, to fully repeal the 8th, not to tinker around the edges, not to make it possible for women who Enda Kenny would approve of their abortions to be able to have abortions, but to remove the legal obstacles which force 10 women a day, many in particular and difficult circumstances, as Jennifer has outlined, and many in other circumstances that don't need to be detailed. Those women need assistance.
So you just want to go back, do you, to 1982, before the Eighth Amendment was put into the Constitution, where, was it the 1860 Offences Against the Person Act, which would make abortion a crime in law? Or what do you want? I mean, because there will be some legislation put in place in the wake of any repeal, won't there?
So if the 8th Amendment were to be repealed tomorrow, the Protection of Life During Pregnancy Act would still stand. That act makes what we're doing in terms of directly assisting women to access the abortion pills, mifepristone and misoprostol, through the doctor-run website, womenonweb.org, illegal. In other words, abortion would still be illegal if we repeal the 8th. What we need then is pro-choice legislation. If you look at the situation in the United Kingdom, 50 years ago, they won a woman's right to choose with legislation based around a woman's right to health.
And that is effectively abortion on demand in the UK. Is that what you want here?
Unfortunately, abortion is still criminalised in the UK. It is not abortion on demand. What we want is for abortion never to be criminalised. We want abortion on the request of pregnant people who do not wish to be pregnant.
Mandy, what do you want to say to this?
I worked in the UK in the 80s and 90s, and abortion on demand is the norm. There is nobody who's criminalised for accessing abortion. And the majority of my mothers, when they would book with me at 16 weeks, the first thing that we would say, congratulations, and it's great that you're pregnant, but now we're going to do some antenatal testing to see if your child has this condition or that condition. And so therefore, society was saying that it's not all right to have a child. Like if you had cystic fibrosis, you would be offered a termination of pregnancy. So it was stigmatising families, and if they chose to hold on to their babies.
Are you saying that if someone had a child with a disability, that people would ask, maybe not openly, but quietly, why didn't you have an abortion?
That was what happened. And actually, so some of my mums with their handicapped children would have been vilified because, oh, why you're putting a pressure on the state with this child? Why didn't you have it aborted?
So your argument against repealing the 8th is?
My argument is that we need to be a holistic society, and we shouldn't segregate people because of certain conditions. And I think that as a society, I think we need to be able to look at the bigger debate and look at the bigger picture and the other options and the effects that abortion has on women down the road. And in my situation, we did statistics of the women in crisis pregnancies. Within 18 months, quite a few, a large number, would have conceived again.
All right, Ailish Ryan of Trade Union Coalition to Repeal the 8th. What's your view on this? What sort of an issue is it for the trade union movement?
Well, I suppose the reason trade unions campaign for the repeal of the 8th Amendment is because the reality is that the 8th Amendment doesn't prevent women in Ireland from having abortions. It prevents lower income and working class and migrant women from having abortions. It's a completely hypocritical situation.
What you're saying, have money, will travel.
Exactly. I mean, Jennifer just told us about how, you know, she was lucky enough to have €3,000 in the bank account, which made her horrendous situation minimally more easier. But I would argue, I'd say if you did a straw poll and asked everybody here who's female, who's able to have a kid, whether they have €3,000 in the bank, I'd say there wouldn't be a majority who have it. And the reason trade unions have taken up the position of working for this issue is that Ireland has an abortion rate comparable to many other countries which have much more liberal regimes. In reality, working class women continue to travel, continue to be forced to carry pregnancies they don't want in Ireland, whereas in countries where you have free and accessible contraception, where you have good sex education, and where you have a welfare system which helps women to have kids when they want to have them, you have much lower abortion rates. So okay. Those are the things that are proven.
What is the trade union movement looking for? Are you looking for abortion on demand as...
The trade union campaign is campaigning for the repeal of the 8th Amendment. We haven't...
you haven't formulated the kind of law you'd like to see post-repeal.
But as Rita said, it's a moot point because of the fact that there is extremely conservative legislation, which we certainly don't agree with, criminalising abortion at the moment.
OK, thank you, some of our audience participants, for joining in. We'll have more later on. But we'll have more on this from our panel after the break.
Does it look like I've got time for a headache? These days, every minute matters. That's why we made Panadol Actifast. Absorbed 2 times faster than standard paracetamol tablets. Panadol Actifast. When pain is gone, life takes its place.
We at Bosch believe that for perfect washing results, you have to dose very precisely. Or not at all. IDOS from Bosch. Fill it up once and it doses automatically. Wash after wash. Bosch, invented for life.
Do it good. Express yourself. Express yourself. See, it's not what you look like when you're doing what you're doing.
0% fat, 0% added sugar, 100% delicious. New Danone Light and Free Greek-style yogurt.
Meet the friends. There's a nutty one, and never a dull moment one. A sweet one, and always gives up her seat one. A smooth one, and always knows what to do one. Some things are better together, like the sweet, smooth and nutty layers of Raffaello. A heart of almond wrapped in velvety filling, delicate wafer and sprinkled with coconut flakes. Raffaello, unwrapped friendship.
How to switch bank. Sean and Kate want to switch bank, but mistakenly think they're in an era where it's hard to do. She dreams of being in control of another bill. He longs to make the bank dance to his tune. Then Kate discovers switchyourbank.ie. She finds switching bank is easier than she thinks, even a current, mortgage or credit card account. They laugh about what silly billies they were. Switching bank is easier than you think. Visit switchyourbank.ie.
Welcome back. I'm conscious we have a lot of younger viewers, so a little bit of history mightn't be out of place. In 1983, following a passionate and strident debate, the people of Ireland voted yes to a new amendment to the Constitution. Now, this gave the child in the womb the same right to life as the mother who carries that child. And the state undertook, as far as practicable, that was the word they used, to defend and vindicate that right. Now, since then, we've had a number of referendums, one protecting the right of the mother to travel abroad for abortions, as thousands do every year, the other providing for the right to abortion information. Now, Ireland has come under fire from EU and UN human rights bodies for what they call cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment of women. Then in 2013, the Protection of Life During Pregnancy Act was signed into law to allow for abortion when the life of the mother was at risk. But after all this time, are we any closer to a clear decision on abortion? Will we listen to the advice of the 99 members of the Citizens' Assembly? And do you wonder, how would we vote in another referendum? As momentum builds on both sides of the argument, Maria Steen of the Iona Institute is with me, and Independent Socialist TD Claire Daly is also here. Maria, do you feel you're trying to push a boulder uphill, that there's a consensus growing to repeal the Eighth?
I don't think so, Pat. But it's interesting when you talk about the Citizens' Assembly and about the various campaigns and so on. There is the sense out there that the Citizens' Assembly is a foregone conclusion. And I think that's a very worrying thing from the point of view of democracy. I think both Claire and I would criticise the Citizens' Assembly, but for different reasons, obviously. I think that the idea of putting a question to the majority to vote away the rights of a vulnerable minority is inherently problematic. I mean, many people... It
does happen, as you know. In Britain, 52% voted for Brexit, leaving 48%. Almost half the people deeply unhappy.
There's a massive difference,
Pat, you know what I'm
respect.
saying. And in America,
no, but I mean,
the winner...
the idea of voting a human right out of a constitution is unprecedented in this country. And, I mean, most people will say, you know, well, we live in a democracy. Why not let the people decide? The problem with that is we live in a democracy and the majority gets to decide the rules simply by virtue of being the majority. And in most cases, that is absolutely fine. But there are times, if you are an individual or a vulnerable minority, then the decision of the majority can feel like tyranny. And because there are times when the majority want to do something to a minority, a vulnerable minority, that is wrong. And the only defence that vulnerable minority has against the majority is a device that is inherently anti-majoritarian.
But
what
it was
we call
put there
a fundamental
by a
human right.
In 1983, it was put there.
But
the people put it there. The people can take it out.
It was put there to protect. Now, we all have the right to life. That was always there. The Constitution merely acknowledges the right to life, as, by the way, do the very many UN treaties and conventions, including the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which the committee you mentioned is supposed to be under the auspices of that convention. And that talks about the right to life of the child, and a child is defined as a human being under the age of 18 years. Now, and that's what the fundamental question comes down to.
Okay.
Is the child in a womb a human being? And if not, what is it?
Okay, but the amendment in 1983 was, if you like, belt and braces. If that right to life was always there, what happened in 83 was to define...
Well, because of the movement around the world that was increasingly legalising abortion right around, and of course our nearest neighbours culturally and geographically were doing that. And so it was with that in mind. But basically what it came down to, and you said it in the introduction there, was that it gave equal rights to the mother and child. Okay. Now, what is wrong with that,
I think
Pat?
The interesting point is that the actual insertion of the clause arose as a result of the pro-life amendment campaign. The backdrop at the time was that abortion was already illegal in Ireland, and there was a movement watching what was happening in America and other jurisdictions that to be sure there'd never be Irish abortion, we'd have this clause. So on the grounds of abysmal failure alone, I think there's an urgent need to repeal the 8th, because it didn't, of course, stop Irish abortion at all. It only ensured that Irish abortion would carry on in England or in Holland, or now illegally with the purchase of abortion pills over the internet. And what we have now actually is a monument to her hypocrisy, because not only do we have the 8th Amendment, but on top of that, Irish women have actually got a constitutional right to an abortion, but only if we have it in a different jurisdiction. I mean, I think that's utterly ludicrous.
But here's the difference between you and Maria. Maria is saying that there's no one to vindicate the rights of the unborn if someone assaults that unborn child, except the protection of this amendment. Now,
I think it's incredibly derogatory to the women of this country and to the majority of people.
And the majority
of people. Well, that's my first thing I'll say, because, you know, people in this country voted, if you like, for the right to people to travel, women to travel to England for an abortion. So most people in Ireland actually see a difference, and they understand that women are responsible for their own autonomy, their own bodily integrity, and are best placed to make decisions that affect their bodies.
I agree with you.
That's really, in essence,
the whole point is it's a separate body, Claire. We have a right to autonomy over our bodies. But the point is, and I've been pregnant with 4 children, that child inside my womb moves separately to me. I have no control over him or her. He or she has a separate body. And that's where there's a difference between us.
You have to respect that. Actually, a majority of people disagree with that viewpoint, that they do not care a very small, in early gestation, in any case, a small bunch of cells, I'm sorry, is not equal to a fully grown woman. It isn't. A sentient, fully grown woman. And you made the point earlier about human rights, but actually the human rights that are being violated and have been adjudicated as so by the United Nations is women's human rights, subject and open to a degrading, inhuman torture and experience breaches of privacy and so on. So Ireland is actually obligated to correct these things in order to be minimum compliant in respecting the human rights of women and indeed their health. We need to expand abortion provision in Ireland. That's not an opinion.
If I can come back just on the clump of cells argument. I mean, the fact is, if a scientist was to look at you or I under a microscope, he'd come to the conclusion that we're clumps of cells too. The fact of the matter is, when the women who travel to England for abortion every year, It's not a clump of cells that's being aborted.
But the women who travel to England are mothers or daughters or sisters.
Babies,
in the main, they're people who already have children.
But babies, for instance, up to the age of 12 weeks, which would be considered an early abortion by most people. Like, I saw my baby for the first time at 11 weeks gestation, 9 weeks after his conception. I could see his little arms and legs moving around. I had to have an early scan because I thought I was going to lose him. And you know what? The first time I saw him on that ultrasound, I fell in love with him. And I think that's why they don't let women see scans in abortion clinics, because they're afraid they might fall in love with their babies and think better of their decision.
I'm very happy for your... I'm very happy for your narrative. And my own narrative was equally pleasurable as a mother. But the point is that other people have a different narrative, and people who want to continue with the crisis pregnancy would be unaffected by a repeal of the 8th Amendment. Their situation will not change. Nobody is compelled in Ireland to have an abortion. The only situation that will change is that the women who now have to travel at enormous expense and inconvenience and heartache, listening to Jennifer's story, it's utterly reprehensible, being exposed to, in essence, torture, will be able to get that routine medical treatment at home, surrounded by family and friends, with less expense, as they do, for example, in Spain, where in the first trimester abortion pills are readily available.
To clarify, you want the 8th repealed, and how far would you go? I mean, do you want abortion on demand? Do you want abortion up to 10 weeks, 12 weeks?
I don't like that term. I think it's a bit flippant. We wouldn't refer to it as, well, on a request, and a medical treatment that is needed or somebody feels they're needed. Yeah, I mean, look, I think in order to progress the situation, we need to certainly repeal the 8th first. I'm in favour of the Oireachtas then legislating for broader circumstances than that.
What term limits would you put on
my
that?
personal view on that, I don't see term limits. The experience would show that, if you like, in the main, in countries where abortion is legal, the overwhelming majority of abortions are carried out in the early stages.
But for the
only
small number
abortions that are carried
babies,
out
you're happy that
later
they be
on
aborted
is for
right up to birth.
very specific circumstances
right up to birth,
related
Claire.
to the health of the mother or the baby. In the case of Jennifer and the other parents, where the fetus could not survive.
I want to go to Maria.
It's legal in England right up to birth in the case of any kind of abnormality.
But Maria, in your case, it's absolute. The 8th should stay in place.
Pat, I have to take issue with you using that word, and you used it to a lady in the audience as well. Like, would you call yourself?
Well, I'm talking about Jennifer's situation. I'm talking about rape. I'm talking about incest. I'm talking about children in the womb who have no possibility of any kind of meaningful cognitive function.
Are there any circumstances in which you think it is permissible by law to kill a completely innocent born human being?
Of course not.
Are you absolutist?
I think in that regard, yes.
And is that a bad thing?
No, I mean, the point that we're debating here is whether or not there are circumstances when an unborn child of a few cells or of millions of cells is, if you like, the property of the woman, part of the woman.
The property of the woman? My daughter is not my property, any more than I was the property of my parents. I am a guardian of my child until she reaches adulthood, but she is not my property. And her human rights... Her human rights should not depend on her geographical location, whether she's inside my womb or outside my womb.
It's just a physical reality.
Exactly, it's a physical reality.
Of course,
and you're
it
saying
depends
you want to
on
discriminate on the basis that she's inside my womb rather than outside my womb.
No, what I'm saying
is
that there isn't an equality there. It isn't an equality of scheme. A fully grown woman, and let's look at the facts.
Now, hang on a second.
I haven't interrupted you.
Okay, all right, go ahead.
The people who have, and the women who have abortions, are in the main the women who have children. They're your mothers, our sisters, our friends, our daughters.
I know.
And they know what's best for them. There are a whole range of reasons why women may choose them. It may be the right choice for some person, not the others, but it is their choice because it's part of their body. And the opposite of what you're saying is that somebody faced with a crisis pregnancy becomes devoid of consent in terms of medical procedure, becomes in essence a vessel.
I would never say that.
Well, that's the reality. If they're a vessel, if they had to carry a pregnancy that was brought about by rape, if they had to carry a fetus that had no prospect of life, if their health was going to be impaired, what you're saying is they're a vessel and their rights are subservient, actually, to that of a fetus.
Last word in this part.
I don't say that at all, but you mentioned that there are no term limits. Are you saying that a baby at 38 weeks is substantially different or should have different rights compared to a born child of 2 weeks of age.
What I'm saying is it's utterly ludicrous to think that somebody would go through a pregnancy at 38 weeks and decide, you know what, I don't think I'll bother with it. If there are reasons there, very valid reasons for the mother or the baby's health.
Doctors for and against the repeal of the 8th. That's coming up next.
There are lots of things that can irritate you, even when you're a footballer. But shaving shouldn't be one of them. With 0% alcohol, Nivea Men's Sensitive Post-Shave Balm instantly calms your skin. Nivea Men, it starts with you.
You need to fold this bit under the other bit. Like that? No, like this. Try this. Are you ready to see your new look? Yeah?
You have the power to makeover.
Oh my gosh, she loves it so much. She can't even talk.
We have the super fast broadband so you can.
An irritating itch is hard to ignore. And it can be caused by your powerful antiperspirants. Introducing new and improved Dove Men Plus Care with 48-hour sweat protection and Dove's 1/4 moisturizer technology. Especially created for men, is tough on sweat, not on skin.
For a limited time only, you could win a mini convertible with Actimel. Find a winning lid and lift the lid off winter. Pick up your pack today.
Welcome back. Who do we trust with the health of a pregnant woman? Some doctors say the 8th Amendment makes no difference to their work and that they don't need lawyers to tell them how to do their jobs. Others argue that their hands are sometimes tied by the law. I'm joined now by two experts in maternity care with opposing views. Dr. Peter Boylan, chairman of the Institute of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and Dr. John Monaghan, obstetrician and gynecologist with some 30 years' experience. John, first of all, have you ever felt pressure from the 8th Amendment in terms of your work?
I can honestly say I haven't felt any pressure. I appreciate the history lesson you gave at the beginning, because I was thinking to myself when you mentioned that, how far back does my own view and my attitude towards the amendment go? And in fact, it goes back before that. I remember being in secondary school when the British abortion law came in 1968. I was 15, I think, and having a furious argument with my best pal in school about it. And I remember there was an expression that time of somebody who was pregnant would be up the pole. And I remember he said to me, if my daughter was up the pole, I'd get rid of it. And I remember saying to him at the time, that's just not fair. You know, from
so your view is...
It was an unfair...
It's a long-standing view.
Yes.
Peter, your view, you would have been similar to John at the beginning of your career.
I think I would have been reasonably close, but as time went on and I worked in the United Kingdom in London and got to see a lot of what went on there, and became quite friendly with one of my colleagues who performed the late terminations for fetal abnormalities. And we had a lot of discussions, because I came obviously from a very conservative background where abortion just wasn't an issue working in Ireland, but it was in England. And coming from Ireland, they didn't expect us to get involved at all. But I was able to have a lot of discussions with this colleague. And I began to understand that somebody from a different view, from a different background, different religious, cultural background, could hold a different view and remain a civilized person. And then I came home and I worked in Ireland for a while, and then I went to the United States as a visiting professor at the University of Texas. And again, I saw a multicultural society with different people having different views from different backgrounds, all of them very, very civilized people. And then I came back to Ireland in 1988, and I've been working here ever since. And I just began to see that life is untidy, it's complicated, people have different views. Other countries have sorted this out, and we don't regard them as uncivilized.
But do you feel, as a doctor, that sometimes your hands are tied, or you second-guess yourself because of the eighth?
Yes, undoubtedly.
Does it happen frequently?
No. The Protection of Life in Pregnancy Bill has changed things and made it easier to deal with women who've got serious health problems where they may or may not die, but you can't predict that somebody is going to die until they're dead. So when we're dealing with a woman who is at risk, whose life is at risk, you can't be certain that her life is at risk until she's dead.
OK. John, that moment where you decide a termination might be necessary to save the life, if you leave it too long, it may be too late to save the life. How do you cope, bearing in mind the eighth, with those decisions that you must make? You must have made at some stages in your career.
On several occasions, which would be clearly etched in your mind, would have had to make very difficult decisions about balancing the well-being of a mother against her child. One has to go through that. And like Professor Higgins, who spoke to the Citizens' Assembly, I have never felt that the law was a relevant factor in me making that decision. And I was referring to history earlier on. The Eighth Amendment, to me, has been an inspiration for one reason, really, in that it is, and it's highly unusual in the world, in that it accords rights to the unborn child. And as an obstetrician, I have always taken that as a very serious responsibility, that I have this child, this unseen member of the human race to look after. And that's a very important part of my whole approach to the patient and her child.
Would you ever find yourself in a situation where you'd have to say no to someone who requested a termination on the basis, for example, as would be permitted under the Protection of Life in Pregnancy, the risk of suicide?
That particular instance, I wouldn't like to comment specifically on that. But
you understand that he could arise? What kind of dilemma?
I know that it does. I know that the threat of suicide does arise. I don't think it's maybe helpful to go into the suicide question in the context of the Citizens'
Assembly.
But
you were against that change too, weren't you?
I was against the suicide provision, yes. I didn't believe that it
Peter,
was
what are you in
subject to
favour
medical
of?
evidence.
I mean, how far would you like to liberalise the regime here?
Well, I think, first of all, we need to repeal the eighth. That's, I'll be very absolutely clear about that. What legislation is put in its place, then, is up to the legislator to decide, following consultation with the public.
But as a doctor, what's needed, do you think? I mean,
well,
do you need to legislate for rape, for incest, for fetal abnormalities, and whatever else?
And serious threat to the woman's health.
Could I ask, does Dr. Boylan accord rights to the fetus, to the unborn child?
In looking after women during pregnancy, we're looking after two patients. We're looking after the baby and the mother. In conditions, the baby in the womb is in an intensive care unit. So let's take the case of a baby who's not going to survive beyond a minute or two or an hour or whatever after birth. They got a condition from which they're going to die, and we know that. Anencephaly is the classic, or a baby who has no kidneys. They will die. There's no question about that.
So when one of our audience members says no one can say for sure that a baby's going to die,
no,
that they could have a viable life.
There are certain diagnoses where you're absolutely clear. But let me just expand on the thing about the intensive care unit. All around the country at the moment, there are people in intensive care units who are going to die if their supports are removed from them, their life support. A baby in the womb is on a life support machine. It's on a ventilator because getting oxygen from its mother through the placenta. It's on dialysis because kidneys aren't working. And it's also getting intravenous nutrition. Now, we are very happy to remove people from life support if they've no prospect of survival when the life support is removed. And that's the way that people need to think about children who've got babies who've got abnormalities when they're going to die.
It simply is.
I can't accept
when
that.
a point comes where you might, for an older person, a person who's very deeply ill, you might withdraw life support. That the same might apply to a baby who's fetally scarred.
The child it doesn't require machinery. It doesn't require an intensive care building. The child is in intensive care. The analogy is a little bit stretched, but if a child is in the womb and it's left there, it appears to me that Dr. Boylan wants to remove that on an elective basis because this child is not going to live. The child is going to live as long as it's left in its
But when it eventually comes to term,
it will be born.
And it's born and it dies. I mean, does that make sense at all?
It does make sense. It does make sense. Right. And you didn't... we had one side, unfortunately, we had one side of the story from the lady who went to Liverpool. There are many, many women who have had the opposite experience, who have cared for their child in utero until it was born, and they would describe the moments they had with their newborn child, even if it was only minutes, as some of the most precious moments in their life.
Okay.
And I have to emphasise that as a very important part of our care.
And I'm sure there are people whose hearts are broken equally when they see the inevitability of the outcome that they had not wished for. Maria Steen, the medical argument that Peter made, you know, we do from time to time withdraw life support from an older person who's not going to make it. So sometimes it might be appropriate in the case of fatal fetal abnormality to withdraw the life support of the baby in the womb.
Well, it was interesting because Peter talked about having two patients, the baby and the mother. And of course, when a doctor has two patients, he or she has a duty to each of them. But he also said in relation to the so-called fatal fetal abnormality, which at the Citizens' Assembly, both the medical and legal experts have said that is not a term that is appropriate or used in practice. But Peter said, they will die, there's no question. But just earlier, he said, we can't predict when someone is going to die until they're dead.
So, let's be very clear here. Medically and scientifically, a fatal fetal abnormality is a condition which is incompatible with life. Now, it may be the case that that fetus is born for a minute or an hour, but it has no prospect of sustaining life if it has no kidneys, no brain, and there are conditions which can be diagnosed by the medical profession.
Yes, I would agree with John 100%, and I have personal experience of looking after women who are carrying a baby with anencephaly, for example, who have gone through the pregnancy and have been rewarded with a couple of minutes of life with that child. That's their choice, and they need to be supported in that choice.
All right.
But if they make the choice, and I've had experience again of this, of a woman who's gone through a pregnancy like that, on the next pregnancy she's come back, the same thing has seemed to be happening, and she said, and a couple have said, I just can't do this again. I want to have a termination.
But Peter, are you
That's
saying...
their choice, and that choice should be respected.
Peter, you've acknowledged as a doctor you have two patients. Are you saying you're happy to directly and intentionally kill one of those patients?
No, what I'm saying is that
But what do you think happens in an abortion, Peter?
You remove them from the life support system.
And
now,
how do you do that? By lethal injection?
We induce women at, say, 36, 37, 38 weeks. Yeah. That's exactly the same thing. We remove them from the environment.
Okay. And what do you do with them afterwards, Peter?
I want to try and conclude this.
What do you do with them afterwards? I think this is important, actually, because Peter is saying, as a surgeon, he is happy to bring the end to a life of a child.
What he was actually trying to do was deal empathetically.
I'm sure Peter can speak for himself
with people, but there is a broader debate here. There's people in the audience who have lost much wanted children as a result of having a diagnosis of fatal fetal abnormality, who you are severely disrespecting here.
We will have more debates on this as we get the Citizens' Assembly verdict and so on, and see what the Oireachtas does. But one question for each of you. Politically, do you think you can win this? I asked you at the beginning, were you pushing a boulder up a hill? Do you think you can win this, retain the 8th?
I think if there is a proper debate on this issue, and if people are exposed to all the different aspects, including the right to life of the child and the reality of what abortion entails, not just for the babies, but also for mothers who suffer afterwards, I think there's a very good chance.
And finally, the point I want to put to you is that referendums are unpredictable things. At the moment, the polls would tell you that you can get it passed. After another strident and noisy debate, those numbers may change.
Yeah.
So are you being premature or maybe over-ambitious in looking simply to repeal the 8th with nothing in its place?
No, I think we've witnessed a sea change in the attitudes of people. I've noticed it even in the Oireachtas. People maybe who had a previously fixed view have been exposed to the human realities of Ireland's abortion.
You think you can win?
And absolutely. I think a referendum is inevitable.
All right.
I think it will
we have to leave it. We've run out of time. Remember, if you want to be part of our studio audience any week, you can apply online, tv3.ie/take part, or email us on audience@tv3.ie. I'll be back, News Talk, at 9 in the morning. But from all of us here at TV3, thank you for watching and good night.